Chair and members of the committee, for the record, Representative Mike Belcher, representing Carroll 4 out of Wakefield. I am happy to be here to present this afternoon. This one, unlike the last, is my bill. It should be no confusion that this bill is indeed named for Charlie Kirk, activist, founder of Turning Point USA, husband, father, and Christian. I personally see Turning Point USA foremost as a Christian apologetics ministry. Charlie Kirk was murdered. He was assassinated. He is a martyr for the faith. This bill is tied to Charlie Kirk in two distinct but very important ways. First, this bill contains the sort of thing that Charlie was frequently driving toward in his activism and his attempt to bring everything that he was into the public and civic realms. Second, this bill seeks to curb the indoctrination into hatreds and divisions of critical theory that fueled Charlie Kirk's assassin and fuels left-wing violence nationwide. Recent incidents are very, very many. Unfortunately, we know this. Over 300 attacks on pro-life pregnancy centers since 2022, largely attributed to the Marxist anti-fascist group Jane's Revenge. 2025, for the first time in the history or modern history of CSIS analysis, left-wing ideological attacks outnumbered attacks from the right. And mind you that this is an organization that finds an awful lot of ways to attribute things to the right. Charlie Kirk was murdered by a alleged perpetrator, steeped in anti-fascist action ideology, now a designated terrorist organization, steeped in queer theory narratives, ties to a group called Armed Queers SLC, a Cuban intelligence-trained terrorist group. He scrawled, "Hey, fascist, catch," on the cartridges he used to kill Charlie. But Charlie's not alone in this violence we have seen. Our president has endured not less and probably more than 2 assassination attempts. Butler Rally 24 and 24, the golf course incident. He caught a bullet in the ear. Repeated shooting and vehicular attacks on ICE facilities and personnel. The 2020 Summer of Love. Dozens were murdered in mob violence, some burned alive in arson fires. Billions of damage done, led by the openly Marxist, critical race theory inspired leaders of Black Lives Matter. Violent pro-Hamas campus occupations have occurred all around us, including in this state. How many here knew that the Palestinian Leadership Organization, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, is actually a Marxist-Leninist organization and a named terror group? Antifa-linked assaults on conservative events and speakers have been commonplace for years. It happened here too, to a gay conservative, Dave Rubin at UNH. Charlie Kirk, Ben Shapiro, Michael Knowles and others were frequently harassed and frequently the subject of violence when visiting our campuses and our schools. This very committee has heard testimony for years from conservatives on school campuses that they're fearful to express their sincerely held beliefs on their campus due to the constant threats of ostracization, that's a mouthful, academic punishment looming, and violence against them and their property. Statistics provided by the UNH Police Department demonstrate a pattern of strong enforcement actions against conservative groups, while seemingly left-wing causes have carte blanche. So let's get into the details here. roots of critical theory. Critical theory originates in Karl Marx, a couple quotes from Marx. The ruthless criticism of all that exists, and as he was fond of doing, quoting Mephistopheles from Faust, all that exists deserves to perish. Marx was not an economist, despite what people may have heard. Marx was a prophet of the socialist faith. When his prophecies failed to materialize, notably the prediction that socialism and communism would rapidly come in advanced capitalist societies in the West, and they didn't go socialist, but backwater Russia did, this disenchanted many faithful socialists and communists. They split the Church of Socialism into different denominations, taking different paths. One pathway was charted by Giovanni Gentili and Mussolini, two disenchanted communists who then developed fascist theory around a national socialism, which was a heresy to international communists. In Germany, the Marxists of the Frankfurt School retooled Marx's dialectical materialism into a dialectical identitarianism, abandoning their revolutionary hopes in the middle class and shifting toward race Marxism, sex Marxism, and cultural Marxism. Developed by Frankfurt School in Germany, but relocated to Columbia University upon the rise of Hitler as America took them in to give them refuge. Formalized in Max Horkheimer's 1937 essay distinguishing critical theory, which is revolutionary, aimed at systems change, radically subjective and akin to a religious prophecy, from traditional theories, which are objective, descriptive, and science-based. Herbert Marcuse, Repressive Tolerance, 1965, and Counter-Revolution and Revolt, 1972, argued for intolerance of all actions and speech from the right and tolerance of all actions and speech from the left, became known as liberating tolerance. It has signaled radical revolutionaries to abandon their overt campaigns of terrorism and bombings of the 60s and begin the long march into the institutions targeting foremost the teachers' colleges. Named examples of some who followed in this path were Weather Underground bombers Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dohrn. Later, Angela Davis, one-time presidential candidate for the Communist Party of America, tied to the Black Panthers, was also readily welcomed into academia and the education fields. Now, I won't go much further, but there is much further that could be gone on in this path, so I would simply point you to a resource if you want to look into this. Look at The Critical Turn in Education by Alan Gultzman. An avowed socialist, communist educator himself, he documented the rise of critical theories in the teachers' colleges from the 1980s, beginning with people like Derek Bell at Harvard in critical race theory, through the early 2000s. Critical race theory, critical legal theory, and intersectionality have their modern origins at Harvard University, Harvard Law, Harvard's Teacher College, Columbia's Teacher College, and the University of Wisconsin, from where they spread to every state in the nation, largely enabled by federal legislation and rules. The result, a Marxian framework, repackaging class struggle into identity oppression, dividing into oppressor and oppressed, and breeding resentment and violence. The current American education paradigm is extremely comparable to Mao Zedong's creation of the Red Guard under the Chinese Cultural Revolution, with their privileged categories and oppressed categories.
Point of order.
What's your point of order?
I don't think this is addressing the bill.
He's giving the background for the bill.
The background has gone over 10 minutes now.
The prime sponsor has leeway to discuss this legislation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With their privileged categories and oppressed categories, as is frequently stated by CCP survivor Lily Tang Williams, with identity provisions nearly also identical to Soviet Bolshevik paradigms, both emphasizing ethnic privilege to divide populations, consolidate power, and resulting in countless deaths via mob actions. Of course, the modern forms of indoctrination and division take up the most public relations and human resources friendly terminology, hiding a long history of atrocity in words such as equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. So this bill, to defeat any allegations that it might not be specific enough, it might be vague. First, it targets specific pedagogies and practices by name. Gloria Ladson-Billings' culturally responsive pedagogy and windows and doors theory inverts sympathy building and common humanity by teaching students to identify with only those matching their identity traits, skin color, sexuality, so on. It narrows the range of sympathy for fellow Americans, and it fuels identity politics and division. Ladson-Billings wrote the book on importing critical theories into American education. This division has been documented in surveys showing greater intergroup preferences among every minority group in the nation, and is likewise fueling a terrible rise in white identitarianism among young men. Queer theory, Marxist feminism, and intersectionality import Marxist analysis as admitted in the primary textbook for critical race theory to portray norms as violent oppression and openly seek the destruction of the family and the expulsion of the father from it. Paulo Freire, the most cited academic in American colleges of education, imports Marxism via liberation theology, redefines literacy as political activism. He so catastrophically damaged the education in his native country of Brazil, he was thrown out of the country before he became a favorite among American teachers' colleges. So let's talk about the elephants in the room and the difficulties that prior legislation has had. Prior law was struck down for vagueness. Charlie Act has clear definitions, targets indoctrination only, not factual discussions. It defines the prohibitions named by pedagogy and praxis, by academic lineage, and in specific practices. Nothing vague. There's going to be an argument made that it infringes on teachers' freedom of speech. I am here to say there is no such thing as a freedom to say whatever you want to other people's children who are held as a captive audience and compelled to attend. The reality is, and this is not a slight by any means, I'm going off of technical definitions here. Educators are definitionally appointed bureaucrats. They must follow the policy set by the elected legislature, not push ideology. That is how this country is supposed to function. You might say the penalties are too harsh, but I've made them purposely not harsh. The penalties involved, rather than penalties, actually prefer remediation and warnings over any kind of employment actions. The possibility of receiving compensatory damages are not immediate. They would actually require that you prove a demonstrable harm that is worth a certain amount of money up to the limit of $10,000. You might say it's not happening in New Hampshire. I would say the walkouts happening this week, along with a slew of documented materials that I have seen, demonstrate beyond any doubt it is here. Presidential executive orders have ordered DEI provisions to be stripped from practice by states, and those that do not may be at risk of losing federal funds. I would also note there's no issue with the fiscal note and budget, as the prior legislation that was on the books that was struck down was already budgeted for. And this requires nothing further as far as personnel or hours or anything else. So the money was already in the budget. In closing, I want to tell you just a real quick piece from what happened in this committee 2 years ago. We were hearing a bill, and I was on the other side of this. I was over at the end here. And it was a bill having to do with things of DEI and equity and things of that nature. We had some representatives from the university system come. During my questioning, I brought up Marxism. I don't remember exactly what I said, but I do remember I brought up Marxism. When the testimony was over, the bill hearing was closed, and people were leaving, two representatives of the DEI office at the university system approached me at my seat. And one of them said to me, "You think you know Marxism, little boy? I studied in Germany." With that, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Any questions?